All right, everybody, welcome back to Doc Conference. I want to kind of give you the lay of the land today. So for the next 45 minutes, we're going to have this session with Dan Cogan from Impact Partners. I'll introduce him in a second. Then we'll take another little 15-minute stretch. And then at 4 o'clock, we'll have a terrific group of filmmakers on the stage to give you a preview of the book called Tell Me Something. This is a book of where the editor, Jessica Edwards, went out to over 50 renowned documentary makers from all different kinds of backgrounds and asked them for advice, what kind of advice they would give. So we're going to have a few of the contributors to that book. Brett Morgan, the director of films like Kid Stays in the Picture and Chicago 9 and On the Ropes. Brett will be here. He happened to be in Toronto, I think, shooting some other project, so that was serendipitous. Tia Lesson, the Oscar-nominated director of Trouble the Water, whose recent project is Citizen Coke, that you may have read about in the news lately as she was having some tussles over financing on that project. And the third filmmaker is Gary Hustwit, who was here at Toronto a couple years ago with his film Urbanized, the third in his trilogy that also includes Helvetica and Objectified. And the book's editor, Jessica Edwards, who's also a filmmaker with several wonderful short documentaries that she's made. So that will go from 4 to 5 o'clock, and then 5 o'clock, your patience will be rewarded by beer, wine, and some snacks outside where we can talk and network and catch up on the day's events. Then a little preview of tomorrow. We're back here 10 to 5 again, starting off with a keynote address from Peter Broderick, who also gave a memorable speech called the Declaration of Independence at the very first Doc Conference 5 years ago. If you want to go home tonight and Google Peter Broderick Declaration of Independence, that speech was also published on IndieWire in 2009. And now he's back 5 years later with a kind of updated version of applying his unique outlook to our marketplace today. And lots of other great stuff. There's a late added session tomorrow with Tom Oyer from the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, who's going to be talking about Oscar doc qualifying. We have Mark Schiller from Bond Influence, and the day tomorrow will end with a very special conversation with Sarah Polley at 4 o'clock. So be here, block out your calendar tomorrow from 10 to 5. Our next talk comes from Dan Cogan of Impact Partners. I've kind of introduced him a little bit earlier today, so I'll just kind of recap what I said before. Impact Partners is a collection of equity partners who put money into documentary films. Some of the films that they have funded include Queen of Versailles, How to Survive a Plague, Hell and Back Again, The Cove, and The Island President. Dan calls this talk he's going to give The Gift is the title of his talk. After he gives that talk, we'll move over and I'll ask him some questions and give you the opportunity to ask him some questions. I should say Dan was here in Toronto on Friday for the premiere of Midway. He flew back to his home in New York to be with family, and then he flew back to be here with us today to give this talk. So please welcome him, Dan Cogan.
Thank you. Tom, all that discussion of my flying makes me feel like I'm an easy lay and I'll go anywhere, but at least anywhere for Tom. Good afternoon. Venal, manipulative, short-sighted, just downright pathetic. There are no better words to describe the dominant strain in the relationship between film producer and investor throughout the sorry history of filmmaking. Both sides are to blame for this state of affairs. Film producers, often desperate to get a film made, will do anything to get investors to come in. Investors, often knowing little of the business other than its supposedly glamorous side, tend not to be aware or even focused of how to properly protect themselves. Or else they become so enthralled with the creative side and they feel that their investment buys them the right to take over a film creatively. Both sides enter the equation with warped expectations, and both often leave feeling they've been duped or had, or just, at the end of the day, feeling like life is too short for all this nonsense. In the low-budget world, the venality of it all tends to be less pernicious, but false expectations, dramatic blow-ups, unhappy partings are no less common. In short, the basic model of the relationship between the financier and the film producer is broken. And yet, since films continue to limp along, getting made, everyone lives with the drama, the imperfections, the hassle. It's seen as part of the process. But it does not have to be so. If you step back and look at the process systematically, outside the context of whether or not any one film actually managed to get made, you can see the current system actually serves nobody's interests in the long run. The producer does all this work to get an investor into a film, and then, because the relationship ends unhappily, the producer has to lay all the groundwork all over again with a new investor or a group of investors for the next film. The investor has the immediate sugar rush of being involved in one film only to wake up with a headache and never want to go near another film again. But the biggest loser is the industry itself. We need more investors coming in and staying in the business, not fewer. But as I said, there is a better way, and it's actually very simple. It's called the gift. Each side of the equation, the film producer on one side, the financier on the other, must see their relationship not as a forum for venality or manipulation or mutual jockeying for advantage. They must do the opposite. They must see their relationship as an exchange of gifts. Each party in the relationship between film producer and film financier has something the other wants. The investor gives the filmmaker the gift of money. The filmmaker gives the investor the gift of art. They are each, in the space of each other's lives, invaluable. Now, just because these things are gifts does not mean there are no rules. To the contrary, the rules of gift-giving are deep, fundamental, and shared by all humanity. What does it mean to properly exchange gifts in the context of making a film? For the investor, it means this. If you give money to the filmmaker, you must acknowledge that the money has truly gone from you to them, meaning that it is their film, not yours, that's being made. You cannot demand to make creative decisions. And you understand your place, which is a central one, to choose the artist to support and to make their artistic creation possible. Of all the artists you could have chosen to work with, you have chosen this one. That is an act of immense power. Now, respect your own choice and give the artist the freedom to make their work, which is an art you love and respect, which is, after all, why you've chosen to work with them to begin with. For the filmmaker, it means this. Be grateful. Someone has just fulfilled your dream. Be respectful. If an investor is smart enough to have chosen you, of all filmmakers, to work with, they must know what they're doing. Do not return their gift with anything other than an equally wonderful gift in return, meaning make a great film. It also means don't draw them into the process unless what you are offering them will make them feel better about their investment, not worse. So, for example, don't show rough cuts if they're not ready. This only leads to disappointment in the investor and disappointment in you if they don't like it. They can't fix the problems in a film. That is your job. They can give support. So don't make them feel you are unworthy of it. In fact, for both sides, strive to make every interaction on the film an exchange of gifts. For the filmmaker, this means involve your investors in the process of making art in a way that makes them feel, rightly, that they have made this all possible. If things are not going well and you are not sure how to fix it, that is exactly the time to be honest and invite them in to problem solve. You will be surprised how open people are to confronting bad news when they feel you respect them enough to share it. For the investor, it means give support to the filmmaker, emotional, psychological, practical, as much as possible. Filmmakers are sensitive artists, whether they show it or not. Your support means a huge amount to them. And if you give of it freely, you will receive great gratitude in return. None of this means that you don't protect yourself contractually. Of course, just the opposite. The more you set the terms for the relationship in a clear, upfront, and contractually protected way, the more everyone is on the same page and knows what is expected from them. But if you approach your relationships, contracts aside, from a spirit of gift-giving and receiving, you will find an amazing set of consequences will follow. First, you'll make a friend, a true friend. That is very valuable in this business. 2, for the investor, if the film succeeds, you will not only make your money, but you'll have a relationship with a loyal filmmaker who wants to work with you again. The result is greater glory and greater chance of financial gain in the future. For the film producer, even if this film fails, you will have a relationship with an investor who may still actually want to work with you again, despite failure. Since the number of factors that can sink any one film is so great, that is a very valuable kind of relationship to have. You will likely need more than one bite at the apple to be successful. So in other words, you may actually be on your way towards having a career. All this is easier than it sounds. The rules of gift-giving were laid out clearly for everyone to see by the great anthropologist Marcel Mauss in his 1950 book, The Gift. He understood that the giving and receiving of gifts was one of the fundamental structures that underlay all human interaction. And the most important rule, he said, was this: when you are given a gift, you must give back a gift in return that is of equal value. If you give back less than you receive, or just the same, if you give too much and do not expect back enough in return, the relationship will turn out to be a bad one. So investors, don't be undisciplined and spend more than you need. Bargain aggressively with your filmmakers. And filmmakers, if you take the money you need to make the film, make sure you spend it well. This sense of equality, that the amount of money a filmmaker invests is equivalent to the value in the glory of art, or in the other glories the investor feels they receive from being part of the world of film. This sense of equality is the key to making the whole system work. Filmmakers, don't see yourself as weak because you need someone else's money. Investors, don't see yourself as dominant because you have the money. Filmmakers have what the investors want: artistic glory. And that is worth the money the investors are spending, or they would not spend it. So the two of you, producer and investor, are equals. You each have something the other wants, and you can satisfy each of your dreams by making a trade. If you see the financing of a film in this way, you will find success even if the particular film ends up failing. As Mauss wrote in his conclusion to The Gift, the Bretons and the Chronicles of Arthur tell how King Arthur, with the help of a Cornish carpenter, invested that wonder of his court, the miraculous round table, seated round which the knights no longer fought. Formerly, out of sordid envy, in stupid struggles, duels, and murderers stained with blood the finest banquets. The carpenter said to Arthur, I will make you a very beautiful table, around which 1,600 and more can sit, and from which no one will be excluded. No knight will be able to engage in fighting, for there the highest place will be on the same level as the lowliest. There was no longer a high table, and consequently no more quarreling. Everywhere that Arthur took his table, his noble company remained happy and unconquerable. In this way, nations today can make themselves strong and rich, happy and good. People, social classes, families, and individuals will be able to grow rich and will only be happy when they have learned to sit down, like the knights, around the common store of wealth. This is the secret. Pass it on.
So, Dan, let me start by asking about some basics about Impact Partners. Impact Partners is, I think, now 30 different investors, or can you tell us what the structure of that company is?
We have 33 investors, and we're very slowly adding each year, but very gently at this point.
And from when a filmmaker approaches you, talk about that process. Like, how does a filmmaker approach you, and where does it go from there?
Filmmakers approach us, and they're looking for money for their films. And to them, we look like a film fund, which is to say they come to us looking for money, and they want us to decide whether or not we're going to give it to them. Inside, our process is very different. I have 33 investors who care deeply about documentary film and social issues and want to help filmmakers make these films possible. And so I approach them to talk about their interest in participating in a film. And we will see about 500 projects over the course of a year in various stages, from development through finished films looking for P&A. And we'll present about a dozen of those to the investors to consider. And in those dozen, the investors, each individual investor decides for themselves if they want to participate in a project or not. And we set out the criteria, the amount of money, all the contractual terms, and then they make a decision, yes or no. And if there are 20 of them that want to be involved in a film, or 10 of them that want to be in a film, we put that group together and we make the financing happen.
One of the things that you alluded to is confronting bad news in the process of filmmaking. There's no film that goes exactly according to plan. Some go less according to plan than others. Can I draw you out a little bit without trying to embarrass any film in particular? But can you talk about experience you've gone through of confronting bad news and the way it got resolved?
Yeah, the sharing of bad news, I think, is incredibly important in the relationship between the producer and the financier. And I think of it in a particular way. I really do think that, as much as possible, every interaction between filmmakers and financiers should be a gift of one to the other. And so when I was talking about rough cuts, for example, it's one thing if you're in the middle of your creative process. That's a time when you don't necessarily want to invite investors in because you still are going through your solutions and your exploration of the material. And if you're asking for someone else to give you thoughts while you're still gathering your own, you'll inevitably make yourself and them happy because you might not want to hear what they have to say. It's another thing if you have reached, as a filmmaker, the end of your line and you feel like you need help. That's a great time to bring people in because you can honestly say to them, listen, I'm not sure what to do, and I want your help. And then you can be open to receiving that feedback. And that's crucial. One of the reasons Impact Partners actually was founded was that there was a film that did from A to Z everything possible it could do to alienate its investors. I mean, the filmmakers were rude, they made a bad film, they weren't responsive. I mean, they did everything conceivable. And I had a couple of folks who I knew who were involved in that film, and I saw how much better it could and should have been done.
Let me ask more about the financial back end of it. So your investors put up a chunk of money. It's usually not the whole budget. Maybe it's never the whole budget. The money's coming in from either grants or broadcasters or a consortium of interests. And I'm sure every deal is a little different, but how in general do those investors get paid back, and where does the filmmaker fit into that equation?
Our investors get paid back from the money that flows into the film once you're exploiting it commercial. So, exploiting it commercially. So commercial exploitation simply means any way that you are generating revenue from the rights to your film, whether it's an all rights deal or a television sale or selling T-shirts on your website or whatever it is, all those flow into one pot. And the investors get their money back until they're whole, usually with a premium, which means a certain amount in addition to that. And then often you go, hopefully, into net profits, where there's a share between the investors and the filmmaker of the money that continues to come in. And usually that's calculated by the amount of money that an investor puts in relative to the size of the budget.
And how successful has this been in the projects you've been involved with, getting investors their money back?
It's worked very well. What I say to my investors is, if you want to be involved in the space of social issue documentary film, you should not be thinking that this is going to be where you make a lot of money. I try to be very open with investors from the beginning, because I think the secret to a successful relationship is that everyone's expectations are on the same page. So if you set expectations right, you usually can't fail, because usually if expectations are in the right place, you're only exceeding them. Hopefully you're not going beneath them. So what I say to investors is, if you want to be involved in this world, we can do that and roughly break even. Sometimes we'll make money, sometimes we'll lose money, but we will essentially be breaking even, and that's what they want, because that helps them make more films. If you're putting money into a film and you can get that money back, then you can roll it into the next film. And that is the way that Impact Partners was conceived, is that each film helps the other film. So we put money into a film, we get that money back, we roll it into the next film. And that has worked well.
Is there a sweet spot to a film budget that can make itself back in this marketplace? There's a difference between films that are budgeted at $1 million versus a film that's made for $50,000.
It's funny. There really is no sweet spot. There's a huge, huge range. I mean, I try and look at it very, very, very practically. And I know who the buyers are, and I know what they pay. And that's not just true for the United States, but it's true for around the world. So you look at a film and you think, who's actually going to buy this? And what are they going to pay? And, for some films, you can look at a film that you think could be a great film, and you can say, there's not going to be more than $50,000 in revenue realistically that's going to be generated by this film. And that happens. And then you can look at other films and you can say, I think this film, is going to generate $400,000 or $500,000, or I think this one is going to be even more than that. The ones that are higher than that are rare. And based on that set of expectations, you can figure out how much you feel it's appropriate to invest.
I want to ask you about when differences arise over the film between filmmaker and investors. Now, as you spoke about, I think it goes without saying that all of these relationships, at least that you're involved with, start with an agreement on paper that the filmmaker has editorial control. And yet, you can have that on paper, and someone who's put in a lot of money may still have an opinion. Can you talk about kind of resolving those differences?
I think that's where a good relationship and the idea of gift giving helps establish it is crucial. For us, we mandate that every single film that we do, creative control lies with the filmmaker. At the end of the day, they have final cut of the movie, not us. And that's important to me because I'm not trying to run a studio. I'm not trying to exclusively maximize profit. I'm trying to make profit while at the same time helping an industry grow. And that means a constant balancing act. And part of helping an industry grow is helping filmmakers make the films they want to make. And so we mandate that the filmmaker at the end of the day has final control creatively. At the same time, we have final control on all business decisions until we get our money back. So if the filmmaker makes a great film, but because they don't have the experience, tries to make a series of bad business decisions, we can say, no, you had creative control, now we're going to have business control. We've never had a problem with this. We've never actually ended up having a problem. And that's what's important about that is that at the same time that we've never had a disagreement with filmmakers about a business decision, we also have participated very, very well in the creative decisions around a film. And filmmakers tend, when we give notes, they know that they don't have to take them, that at the end of the day, the film is theirs. But they also know that we've been involved in a lot of successful films, and we know how to make films better. And they know that we are ultimately on their side, that we are trying to help them make the best film possible. And they know that because they feel it in the nature of the interaction. And that's why the emotional quality of that interaction is so important. Because at the end of the day, whatever is on paper, what's much more important is the way that you relate every day and the respect that you give to each other. And if you can have that kind of relationship, you can play a huge role in a very positive way in making a film better.
Let's bring the house lights up, and we can take some questions from the audience. Here's a first hand up. If we can get this gentleman, microphone's coming to you, sir. If anyone else wants to raise their hand for a next question, we'll get you a microphone.
She handed me the flashlight to talk into. Just wondering, do people come to you with finished projects, and do you fund the marketing campaigns? Because after all, if they're social issue films, are you interested in helping them, if they're good films, reach a wider audience from that stage, or is that too late for you?
We've done that. We did that with the Cove, and we're doing that with a film on the Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas trials that premiered at Sundance called Anita, which will be coming out in the spring. So yes, we do that from time to time.
And what does that look like? I mean, you'll come in when a film is finished. It has one foot into the marketplace, but maybe hasn't made all its sales yet. So you can put some money in with the expectation that some other revenue is going to be coming into that film. That's
right. We tend to do it. We don't do it that often because when you're investing in P&A, what that basically means is that no one else has wanted to put up the money.
P&A being print and advertising.
Being essentially these days just marketing money to release a film theatrically and then in the ancillary rights after that. When you're making a decision to do that as an investor, you're essentially saying, I know better than all the distributors out there who do this for a living. They've decided not to put this money into the film, and I'm going to do it, and all of a sudden I know better than them. Now, I try not to be that arrogant, and so very seldom do I feel like I know how to do this better than the people who really do it. Every once in a while, there is an opportunity where you think, for whatever reason, people don't quite see the value in the film that you see. Also, I tend to be guided by different things than distributors. I have investors who care deeply about particular issues and want to see those issues represented in the culture, and that motivates me as much as purely financial considerations.
Let me ask you this. Your Impact Partners is highly selective about what it takes on. You get a lot of pitches. So for someone sitting here who maybe isn't going to be able to work with Impact Partners, but connects with someone else, maybe it's their uncle who has $50,000 put in a film, or a hedge fund investor who's a friend from college. What would be the three basic things you would say to say to that investor before you take their money?
it's a great question, and I'm not sure if there are just three. But it's also hard to outline it. I mean, in a way, the answer to that question is the fruit of 20 years of doing this. But I would say there are some simple fundamental things. One of them is I'm a huge believer in setting expectations in the right place. And this is a little bit of what I talked about in the speech. If your goal is just to sucker someone to give you money to get one film made, you can say whatever the hell you want. I mean, you can tell them that the film is likely to generate millions and millions of gross revenues and whatever, and you might be convincing and be able to convince them. But when you fail at that, which is what will likely happen, you've lost that person forever, and then you have to live with what you've done. And so for me, I think a better way of doing it is to be brutally honest with yourself and with your investor. Because the truth is, the people who are funding these kinds of films are generally not doing it to make a lot of money. And if they are, they're going to be unhappy. And there's no reason to be the source of that unhappiness. It's going to bounce back against you in very negative ways. So I try to be brutally honest with investors about what is possible. And I find that when you are that honest and you're also very passionate about what you're doing, people really respond, because usually in the world, they're not treated that way. If you treat people honestly and with dignity and are upfront with them, you'll be surprised by what you can get, because most of the world just doesn't function that way.
Who's got another question? Where's the microphone?
I have two questions.
Right, there we go. And then
first question is...
Get a microphone ready for these folks up front here. Go ahead, Bam.
First question is, how would you define or gauge success for a film? And the second question is, are you open to working with producers from around the world, or what kind of requirements do you have?
We work with producers from all over the world. We've done films all over the place, both with international filmmakers and with American filmmakers. And in fact, a film that's appealing to an international market is great, because there are only so many buyers in the US, and there are only a couple that actually pay anything of significance. And so if you have a film that you can also sell in France and Germany and Japan and Italy and et cetera, it makes it possible to invest much more in a movie than if it's just an American film. What was the other part of your question?
How do you gauge success?
It's a great question, and you and your investors have to come to an agreement on what success looks like. For some people, success is premiering at the Toronto Film Festival. For some people, it's winning an Academy Award. For some people, it's none of the above, but it's making money. For most people, it tends to be some combination, balanced in unique ways among those things. And you have to figure that out. I mean, if my mandate were to exclusively make docs in which I could make money, I think I could do that, but I don't think I'd be premiering every film here. And if my goal were to premiere every film at Toronto or at other great festivals around the world, I think I would probably lose money. So I think there's a balance to how you go about it, and that's very much determined by you and your investor and the conversation on a particular film and what your shared goals are.
Let me ask you this scenario. Someone starts out with a $250,000 budget. Your group is coming in for, let's say, half of that. The filmmaker acts in good faith, spends their $250,000, but things happen, and really to finish this film, they're going to need another $50,000 or another $100,000. What happens in that scenario?
We've never had it happen. And I think filmmakers know that along with all of our support that comes in a variety of ways outside of funding, comes an expectation and a requirement that they're going to deliver on budget. We've never had a situation in 7 years where a filmmaker has come and said, I've spent too much money and I need more from you. Just because they know that that's not part of the equation.
Who's got the microphone? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I just want to ask, what about controversial films? Like, there's a couple of my ideas running around, and they're controversial, and then some of them will tell me, investors, oh, it's too expensive, that sort of thing. How do you deal with that kind of social issues that are controversial films?
I love controversial films. I think that they tend to generate more revenue precisely because they're talked about. And one of the problems in our culture is that there's so much material out there that it can be hard to break through. So controversy can help you break through. We did an extremely controversial film last year that premiered at Sundance or earlier this year called Pandora's Promise, which makes the case that if you truly believe in climate change, if you're serious in believing that it is real, then you have to seriously consider nuclear power as a major source of power in the world, because it is actually, if you look at the record, Fukushima included, over the scale of a century, it's safe relatively, and it's non-carbon emitting, and it's the only thing that can scale up. We could have an argument all day about it. We don't need to get into it now. But that was a very, very controversial film, and that controversy has helped it significantly. Whether or not a film is a big budget is a completely different question. And, you as a filmmaker, you need to think about what is the budget you need to make your movie. And you can raise money that doesn't require you to recoup all of it. So, for example, if you have $1 million film, you could raise $800,000 in grant money. And if you can do that, you only need to return, whether it's through equity or a loan, or maybe it's a pre-sale or whatever, $200,000 is really out there then. Then the effective budget comes down to $200,000 in terms of the money that you have to find and return. So I don't actually take the budgets of films very seriously. I take very seriously the amount of money that would require returning.
Get this gentleman a microphone here.
Right, you're an investment fund. I mean, if the money doesn't come back to you, how do you stay in business? What percentage would you charge on what is essentially a loan, I guess? And how do you recoup?
Well, we recoup by the revenue generated by the film. And if consistently money didn't come back to us, we would not stay in business.
Who's got... Get this gentleman over here, microphone.
Hi, good day. Do any of your investors require, say, like a product placement, really, how should I say it?
A private placement memorandum.
Yeah, something like that, like say a service or a product that they, own or represent?
There's a complicated answer to that question. The short answer is that most filmmakers either don't have the budget or aren't sophisticated enough to properly create a private placement memorandum and an LLC that would bring investors in to be part of it. So we tend to work with filmmakers who have single-member LLCs, and we contract with that LLC, so we don't actually become members of their LLC per se. We have done it otherwise, but the requirements on filmmakers in terms of reporting and legal spending are so great that if it's a small documentary, that can overwhelm the filmmaker's ability to do it.
Time for one or two more questions. Back there, that woman has her hand up. Get her.
Hi, my question is, impact is somewhat of a, outlier, because I would think other investors would be looking at a positive ROI. Can you comment on that and tell us where the rest of the market is, if there are investors like Impact's investors who are, just wanting to do it for, raising social issues? And if not, then what is the kind of ROI they're looking for?
You have to ask yourself fundamentally, when you're talking to investors, if you're making the case to them that they are likely to make a profit or not. And if you're going to make the case to them that they are likely to make a profit, you should really believe it. Because then you're setting yourself up for a situation in which if you do not make a profit, you have disappointed yourself and them. So it's really going to be specific to each film what's going to be possible. But you as a producer have to think that through and make that decision.
Get this gentleman microphone here on the edge. Oh, sorry. I'll get you next now that she's running to him, and you'll probably be the last question.
So you just said something I think very vital. Most documentary filmmakers have little capacity for evaluating what their audience will be or what the markets will be for their documentary. What can you offer in just kind of an awful generalization kind of way about those kinds of determinations so that when you come to an investor, you could actually have some intelligence behind the projection that you make to them?
The first thing that you can do is educate yourself. So read the trades, go to film festivals, go to places like the Hot Docs TDF, where films are pitching and you see the reaction of buyers. Go to IDFA, the Documentary Film Festival in Amsterdam, and to their pitching forum and see the reactions of buyers and educate yourself about what's out there. That takes time, but it's very valuable. Another thing you can do that's more short-term is partner with an established filmmaker who's done this before. One of the biggest pieces of advice I like to give to first-time filmmakers is find a filmmaker who you admire, whose work you love, whose work you think yours might be similar to in some way, and try and get them involved as an executive producer on your film to give you advice, to give you guidance, to make introductions, to help you set expectations in the right place, and to maybe even give you some bona fides from someone else to vouch for your project. Those kind of relationships can be extremely valuable both to an individual filmmaker in the scope of their career and also to the success of an individual film.
And we have, there's a microphone right behind you, sir.
Okay.
Wait, just take the microphone, please.
Oh, very quick question. And how I have a film, and I don't want to go into that needs like a bit of post-production money. It's controversial. It's how do we reach you? How do we send something to you?
We have a website. You can go. We have an official submission process that you can see, and we actually look at everything that comes in the door.
And that website is?
www.impactpartnersfilm.com.
We are going to take a 15-minute break and then be back here at 4 o'clock for Tell Me Something. It's going to be a great panel. Thank you very much to Dan Cogan for his films and for sharing his advice with us.
Thank you. Thanks.